We've reached the halfway point in the season. A lot more is being set up, more seeds being planted, and I get the feeling that the latter half of the season will be full of resolution, as many of these seeds grow into plot trees? I don't know. Hopefully not plot weeds, though. So welcome again to another episode of History of Westeros podcast, a podcast dedicated to George R. R. Martin's Song of Ice and Fire book series, as well as HBO's Game of Thrones. Of course, we will not be talking at all about George R. R. Martin's Song of Ice and Fire book series. We will be talking about HBO's Game of Thrones exclusively. There may be the occasional mention of the books, but it will be a shallow reference, nothing spoilery, only to draw comparisons or to point out something interesting. But as I said, no spoilers. So welcome again, Sean. Thanks for coming back.
Good to be here.
We've got a lot to cover, maybe a little less than usual, but there's always plenty to talk about, and we can always look ahead and make predictions when we don't have the same analysis to make. I think we're on the cusp, though, of a lot of major things happening. There's a lot of build-up, which means a lot of potential for exciting resolution once this build-up peaks into major things happening. So surely some of these things will carry over to next season, but the pattern seems to be from past seasons that the bigger events happen towards the end of the season. There's plenty of major deaths and things like that and early in the season, like Joffrey and Robert and Barristan. But most of the major things and major deaths happen later in the season. All the Neds and Reds, Lord Eddard being the Ned, the Red Wedding, the Red Viper, these things happen later. So I did also read, interesting note here, that I didn't fully verify it, but I believe it's accurate, that this is only the fourth episode of the entire series that doesn't have King's Landing. The other three episodes would be the Battle at the Wall, the Reigns of Castamere, aka the Red Wedding that we just mentioned, and from season 1, the King's Road episode, which, if I remember correctly, is the episode with the Butcher's Boy and the death of Sansa's Direwolf Lady. Now, after the credits, we're going to discuss the next on, meaning what's coming up from the trailers. We're going to save all that discussion till the end, like I said, till after the credits. This way, people who want to hear us dissect such things will get their fill, and those who do not want to be spoiled on such things will have an easy way to avoid all the chatter on it. A quick announcement before we get started. Tower of the Hand's new book, A Hymn for Spring, features an essay by Ashea and myself. You could go ahead and check that out. You can go to our website, historyofwesteros.com, and there's a link in the right sidebar that says A Hymn for Spring. You can order it and support the show and entertain yourself with some great essays. So check that out if you get the chance.
Is that a spoiler free? Like, could I read that, or should I steer clear?
You should steer clear.
Okay.
That's a good question. That's really for book readers only. It's a very deep analysis. Some of the essays would not be spoilery, but some would, and I couldn't tell you off the top of my head which ones to avoid and which ones not. Anyway, let's start at the Wall. We have Maester Aemon and Sam, and Aemon again with Jon. So we find out that the Wall has learned of the existence of Dany and her dragons. That's the Wall being remote means that if news is spread there, it's probably spread all around. We're finally seeing this big news hit Westeros in a lot of places. What do you think about general reactions to that? What do you think people are going to think about dragons and this last Targaryen and all this stuff?
I can imagine there not being too much of a reaction. That probably should be, and maybe some people will, but the Wall has already been witness to some fantastic stuff, and it's more in their face. Like, yeah, sure, dragons, other side of the world, whatever. We got zombies next door, you know? And we've seen people on King's Landing be presented with this type of information, just blow it off like it's nothing. So, Tywin, right? Joffrey went to Tywin. That was a great scene. You remember when Joffrey's on the throne and Tywin comes in and talks? It was a couple of seasons ago, but it was one of the highlight scenes of the series to me. And, you know, Joffrey's kind of whining at Tywin, and Tywin, you know, it's, oh, we can have you carried. You remember that bit, right? And,
yeah.
But that was a point Joffrey made. Like, this Targaryen girl, she's got dragons. And Tywin's like, yeah, look, we got dragon skulls all over this place. I'm not worried about that. You know, he blew it off. And Tyrion warned the council about word from the Wall with zombies coming. And they're like, zombies, come on, Tyrion. Tyrion kind of shut up. He was ready to lose face even mentioning it, you know. So I can imagine the people at the Wall specifically, and maybe other people, don't think too much of it. You know, it's not in their face enough. It doesn't affect their day-to-day life. They might regret it later on, but my guess is it won't have a big impact on many characters.
Yeah, it is not exactly crazy to think that someone that far away won't have an impact on their lives, even though she has dragons and potentially an army. She is really, really far away, and there's no sign at this point of her coming to Westeros, so it's true. It'd be like, oh, well, that's interesting, but why should I worry about it?
The news even came with, but she's barely holding on to the city, you know.
That's true. It doesn't make her sound like she's a threat. It makes her sound like she's in trouble, as Aemon says, all by herself, a Targaryen, you know, alone and all this. So that's kind of interesting. Now, of course, there was a very subtle reference there when we talked last week about Jon's parentage and some of the hints that have been dropped. It was very interesting that there was a little bit more about this in this scene. It was very sneaky, though. Aemon says, what a terrible thing for a Targaryen to be alone in the world. And then the camera just... Jon comes in, and it's right on him immediately.
Focus shifted from Aemon to Jon in the foreground to Jon in the background.
If you were really keyed into either that mystery, you noticed that. Or if you're keyed into camera angles, like if you're a movie critic type, someone who's really observant of the way the cameras are working, you probably noticed that. And good catch if you did. So I wonder if they're going to be making other sneaky references like that going forward.
Makes me wonder if they've made others that I didn't pick up on.
Yeah,
how many
right?
times in the past little things like that have happened. Because I think they often do a good job with the cuts from one scene to the next. There's often some connection or meaning to why they place the order of scenes as they do.
Yeah, and we sometimes don't discuss those things as clearly because we like to break things down by location to keep from jumping around from topic to topic. But occasionally by doing that, we do miss some of those subtleties by how they do scene changes. We try to bring them back and discuss them because we notice them too, but that does occasionally get lost.
Sometimes it gets lost in their own editing process too. I remember one time we watched one of the episodes with commentary by the director. And she pointed out that there were certain scenes that she had directed for this episode that got placed in a different one. And by certain scenes she didn't direct that got edited into this one. And so I think oftentimes they do a good job with it, but I can also understand a million different reasons why in the production process some things get lost.
Yeah, it's not like a book where you can just move a chapter around or move a section from here to there. It's different with a TV show. Especially because you have different directors and writers writing each episode. So moving one scene to a different episode can cause an interesting reaction from the fan. Think, oh, this writer wrote that? Well, no, actually that writer didn't write that. A different writer wrote that. That's especially confusing for, in the past, this season George R. Martin didn't write an episode, but he did for all the other 4 seasons. And that even has happened with his episodes. You say, oh, George wrote that scene? Well, not necessarily. He wrote that episode, but some of those scenes might have been, written for another episode originally, and then they had to shift things around. So it's a little hard to keep track of. So basically the point there is I wouldn't assume that every scene in every episode was actually written by the accredited writer. So it's
I also wouldn't necessarily say it's bad either.
No, it's not.
Certainly it can be sometimes, but I think that filmmaking is, what's the word, a group effort. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there's all sorts of different talent. The person who wrote the episode isn't as good an editor as the person who edited the episode. You know what I mean? All the different people have their different strengths and talents, and it all comes together to make this show. And
that's true.
It might not be exactly what I want or what any one writer wanted, but it's a group effort, and I think they're doing a pretty good job with it. So.
And that's a big difference between a book where it's almost all, the book process is 99% George R. Martin, and then there's 1% is his editors and publishers that have some input. Because an author with clout like George R. Martin does not have to accept edits. They say, I think we should do this. He's like, no, I don't want to change that. And they're like, okay, George, have it your way. They're not going to force him. A lesser writer, they may push a little heavier on, but no, they're not going to do that to George. So we have a scene with Sam and Gilly. She asks a funny question, is this every book there is? And he says, this library is small, actually. And talks about, how he wanted to be a maester and all these other things. And that's kind of neat. We get a little insight into his father. Stannis comes into the room and Gilly flees.
Quickly left. I thought it was odd how quickly she got out of there.
Do you have any thoughts on why she left so quickly, or what?
The best I've got is that there is such disparity in their positions. She's a inbred wildling girl, you know what I mean? And this is the king of Westeros. I can imagine like if Obama walked into the room when, someone is not even like a servant in the house, just a guest in the house was,
You
like
don't even have to like Obama to feel that way.
foreign guest in a house where Obama walked in. The guest might feel like, oh, I shouldn't be in here right now, And there might be some legitimate fear that's been put into her. She hasn't exactly been treated well by Stannis' wife, for example. She kind of hushed her out of there, separated her from Selyse,
Obama also worships the Red God. Did you know? So Stannis also brings up Sam's father, Randall, mentions that he's a good soldier. He's the only one who was able to defeat Robert in battle. And Stannis mentions that, has to throw in a jibe there against Robert. He's like, I told him not to go that far west, and but he never listened to me. But we get another side of Stannis's good leadership, his good leadership qualities, where he's kind of doing the right things. You pointed out some things that you like about Stannis. You've mentioned that you're a bit of a Stannis fan, if not a big Stannis fan. I have to think you liked this scene and the way he appreciated, the way the research and all that, and the way he supported that.
I also wonder, how far the show is going to go, how realistic it is. Maybe Sam will be a Maester. Aemon, correct me if I'm wrong, did Aemon Targaryen... He started off as a Maester and then ended up at the Wall, or did he go to the Wall and end up being a Maester?
He's still a Maester. He became a Maester before going to the Wall. He became a Maester pretty young, and he went to the Wall because he didn't want his brother's reign to be threatened by. He
didn't want there to be conflict over bloodlines or whatever.
Right.
Yeah. So at the Wall, he could still be a Maester, but not have the
because his brother was not actually. The crown didn't just come to him. It was decided it should go to him because there was a succession problem, and Aemon was older than his brother, but was already a Maester. But there's ways of letting people out of their vows, et cetera, et cetera. So he didn't want to. So he took double vows.
Man, if only there was some way that there was a way for Jon to get out of his vows.
If only, huh? So another question I have for you, Sean. First of all, I think his line "Keep reading" is a funny nod to book readers, because that's what George R. R. Martin always used to say to people who asked him questions that they shouldn't ask. He'd be like, "Who's John's parents?" And George would be like, "Keep reading." He's like, "I'm not going to answer that question." He's like, "Come on, ask a legitimate question." But another thing that gets mentioned in this series, or in this scene rather, is the Children of the Forest. They've been mentioned. There's been references to them peppered throughout the series here and there, a little bit thing. This is apparently a bigger connection. The Children of the Forest. It sounds like they have some answers, or had some answers to how to deal with the others, because they're an ancient race. The others are an ancient race. I don't know if you've given the children much thought, but they've been mentioned a few times, and I've never asked you that. So maybe this would be a good time for you to give your thoughts on that.
I haven't given it a whole lot of thought. I was vaguely aware of them as an ancient race, and they were kind of thrust in our face with the scene with Bronn last season. But there were so many other questions and so many other things happening there.
Clearly still alive, but not many of them apparently.
And I wonder, however many are alive, how much documentation there is, how much literature they have. Is there something for Sam to even read about them that could be a clue? Maybe Sam needs to take a trip to Old Town. There's a
lot of talk about Old Town.
I didn't quite finish that thought a second ago, but could Sam become a Maester still? I feel like they might be setting that up. Jon maybe is kind of young to be Lord Commander, but he is. I don't know how the Maester's chosen. Is it a vote? Is it an appointment by the king? Is it an appointment by the Lord Commander? Like if Aemon dies, which they seem to be hinting at, could Jon just anoint Sam? Does he have to go through some process?
Jon cannot title him Maester. He has to get his Maester's chain from the Citadel.
Okay.
But he would, since Sam is already a brother of the Night's Watch, they wouldn't quibble over. I think technically they might have the right to appoint a different Maester there, but they couldn't force someone to take the Night's Watch vows. I don't suppose this would be a problem. They would simply train Sam or whatever, assuming he's capable, which I imagine he is, and then he would return with his chain and be an official Maester.
Maybe have it as a temporary position too, like Alistair Thorne was a temporary acting Lord Commander for a while, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the only question is there time for that? When are the others coming? the White Walkers rather. It's the thing for show watchers. The others is what they're called in the books. Just to be clear, they're not usually the White Walkers is sort of a nickname, but they're officially the White Walkers in the show. Sometimes I say others just because it's an old habit. Just when I say the others, I mean the White Walkers. So
I think it would be so awesome if they got, I don't remember the actor's name, but Ben from Lost. If he was one of the White Walkers.
That would be funny. So, and that is, by the way, folks who don't know, if you hadn't heard that before, that is one of the main reasons they didn't want to call them the others, because there was already the others on Lost, and that was, they didn't want to duplicate that. It would feel like maybe they were ripping that off, even though Game of Thrones has been around long before Lost. But still, good thing to not be too confusing. And White Walkers is a lot more descriptive, I suppose. I don't really have a preference on the names myself. I'm just used to one of them. So basically, though, yeah, we're faced with this potential or oncoming threat that Jon talks about a lot in this episode, and that Stannis is certainly aware of and wants to deal with. The only question is the timing. When will it happen? Will they be ready for it when it happens? Or will the struggles in the realm or Sam's knowledge, will it not be far enough along? Will they be able to learn things in time? It's very interesting. It's kind of a technology race. They're racing against the clock, so to speak, of the onset of winter. Will they be able to do all these things before winter has come? And it's a very ongoing tense situation that is kind of casts a shadow over the whole series. I think is very interesting and very compelling. So yeah, we'll have to see if the children play any more roles, since we know they exist. It seems hard to imagine that they won't do anything. There's got to be doing something, but as far as predicting what, yeah, who knows? We'll have to see. But it's certainly it's clear that they have power and that they will do something. We'll just have to see. So, Jon and Tormund. Tormund here on my chest, as always, represent. The talk of unity was very strong. There was a lot of staring down in this scene. They were like fixed on each other's eyes, like, I'm not backing down. I'm not backing down. Okay, let's make a deal.
Tormund was really a large man, too. He seemed to just menace over Jon. It's like a big head.
His eyes are really intense, and his beard is very large, and he is very large. Yep, he's a good casting for that role. Yeah. So what do you think, though? This is interesting. Tormund convinces Jon that he needs to go with him. Is that a setup, or was that, I mean, it was a pretty good argument. Was it just a clever, did he take the opportunity of a good common sense argument to set up Jon, or do you think Tormund is legitimately concerned about his people and is going to take this opportunity for what it is, or do you think he has something else in mind?
I was assuming that Tormund was genuine. In fact, the whole time I felt like, why didn't Mance see it? How did this conversation is going so much better than the prior conversations have?
Yeah.
And
because Tormund saw Mance get burned, it was like, all right, I better be reasonable, or I'll get burned. I don't really think that, but I have to think it mattered a little bit.
Yeah, I definitely still kind of stir over the decision that Mance made early on there, and Stannis too, for that matter. I felt like they could have talked it out better than they did. Especially with so much at stake, I feel like they should have talked it out better than they did. Even if they end up with the same conclusion. Even if in the end, Mance is going to get burned to death and there's no compromise, I feel like there should have been a better conversation. So I was happy that at least there was a good conversation here with Tormund, who... And maybe that's something we're supposed to be seeing here, is that Tormund is worthy a leader as Mance, or on par at least,
We'll see.
But maybe it's a trick. Maybe it's just a trick. And in fact, they might have even given us a clue to that when Ollie suggests to Jon that it's just a trick, right? You're not really doing this, are you?
Maybe. Yeah, the other trick. Yeah, Jon is the one making the trick.
But I think Jon is clearly not doing something deceitful here. But I don't think Tormund is either. Because I don't think... I'm trying to remember, has Tormund specifically seen walkers?
He hasn't seen them on screen, but it seems likely that he's seen them, being a wildling, and all Mance has talked about seeing them and all that.
Yeah. I don't know. We'll see, but I'm taking him as being honest for the moment. So
there's a mention of a place called Hardhome, which is where the wildlings are gathering, and a little bit of background on Hardhome. I don't know if the show has mentioned this, but just from my own knowledge, the Hardhome was the first attempt, or the closest thing to a wildling town It's not really a town, but it's the closest thing there is to such a thing. And at one point it had a port, and it was destroyed. I don't know how the show is going to refer to its destruction, or if it will at all, so I won't go into much detail there. That's getting into book territory. But it seems very likely that we'll be seeing Hardhome now. And John going with is interesting. I struggle with this a little bit because John is clearly not really solid as a leader yet. I don't mean that he's not being a good leader. I mean that others haven't fully accepted him. And immediately he's making this decision that a lot of people find questionable. And he's kind of forcing it on them without them accepting it. And that is not a great leadership quality, especially for someone who is a new leader, for people who hasn't been fully accepted, for there was a little, he was barely voted in. He won by one vote. Yeah. Him leaving on this mission that others aren't going to approve of at such a time when his leadership is kind of in flux, I don't know, it seems a little bit like he could be asking for trouble there. What do you think about that?
I thought about a lot of that stuff too, and I think in the end, I don't want to say it's okay, like I get to approve. But
approved by Sean.
My thoughts are, one, that this might further solidify the decision or his belief in it or whatever. Like, fine, you want to go? You want this to happen? You go do it. I can imagine. 'Cause otherwise, what's going to happen is he's going to stay there at the wall and tell hey, Alistair, you go with the wildlings. You know what I mean? Like, that's not going to work.
Yeah, he wouldn't negotiate well.
And he's also been, well, not only would Alistair not negotiate well, but Alistair doesn't believe in the mission in the first place.
Well, that's what I mean. He wouldn't negotiate well because he doesn't believe in the mission.
And other people wouldn't buy into John's leadership if he sent someone else to do the dirty work. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? So,
and John is a northerner, and the northern way thing is kind of to do it yourself.
Yeah.
It's the,
and certainly it's a questionable decision, but John started off with that. He knows it's a questionable decision, but if he's going to do it, this is the way he has to do it.
Yeah.
And so...
so it's kind of like he has to do it, but it doesn't mean he isn't sticking his neck out a little more, and he is maybe making the situation a little worse as far as his leadership goes, but...
He also might have even decided or realized or considered that I might lose control of the wall. I might come back and they don't set me as Lord Commander anymore. Except I don't care about that. I'm trying to save. My vow is to protect the realms of men. It doesn't matter if I'm Lord Commander, I'm going to protect the realms of men. You know what I mean? He's got a higher good in mind. There's definitely lots of issues with this, but I think overall... it makes more sense to me than Mance getting burned alive.
And it really shows that we really get the point is really driven home about how much the Watch does not like this idea. By Dolorous Head, who is probably John's closest friend left on the wall, is also against it. And it's the same thing. All the people who complain about this decision all bring up the same thing: who they've killed. The wildlings killed Gren. They killed Pip. They killed Ollie's family. They killed all these other nameless brothers and all these other. The people at Molestown, all these women, all this stuff. It's like, they can't get over that. This is really emotional. It doesn't matter how smart or progressive John's thinking is. These people the brothers on the wall have very, very strong emotional feelings about the wildlings. They've been brought up to hate them. They've been brought up to think of them as enemies. John, it's bad leadership to simply tell people, hey, look, this is what we have to do. You have to accept your ancient enemies as friends now. That requires... more massaging, more selling of the idea. And I think John did a bad job of selling it. He brings up just the fact that they're people. He says, women and children, but they don't care. The Night's Watch does not care about that, and John should know that. When he brings up the fact that, we're building the White Walkers a huge army, that's the point he needs to hammer home.
Yeah.
That's what he should have led with that point. But he finished with that point after all the arguing happened, and that's the thing. That's the point that really matters. Although I'm not sure that it really does matter. It does. I mean, you could say, what do you mean, Aziz? How could it possibly not matter that they have, 100,000 new zombies on their side? There's still a 700-foot wall of ice. What are the zombies going to do to that?
Yeah. Well, one, apparently they're going to do something. They're worried about it in the first place. I don't know. I don't know if enough of the nature of the zombies or the magical properties that it might be there or what else could come with winter. But they are worried about it, one way or the other.
Yeah. Well, supposedly from history, I'll jump in here with the little factoid.
Okay.
The wall was built after the original invasion of the others from the Long Night a long time back. Although the timeline is sketchy on that, it's possible that it was started before that. The wall wasn't just like built in a day.
Instantly built, yeah.
It was built and then it was added to and then added to and then successfully over generations it's grown taller. It's only recently, relatively recently in the wall's history that they stopped adding to it. That's partly because the manpower has declined. Also because they probably were like, well, that's big enough.
Yeah.
Even George is on record now saying, yeah, I made the wall too big. I shouldn't have made it that tall. But that said, so we don't know. We don't have necessarily historical if the wall was built before the original Long Night. Let's just say, for argument's sake, that the wall existed before the original invasion of the White Walkers. We have no stories telling us how that all went down. Were the zombies just stymied by the wall? They're just like, oh, I can't go forward anymore, and I can't climb because I'm an uncoordinated white. But magic could be involved. Maybe the White Walkers are able to bypass the wall somehow, or they can send their zombies around. If that happens, then the wall is not so great after all.
Yeah.
But from my perspective, surely that's a consideration. This huge wall. The zombies can't just go around it, just like the wildlings couldn't.
Yeah.
Not in large numbers anyway. They can in small numbers.
Yeah, I guess that is as far as the wall goes, maybe it's enough. Hey, we don't care about the wildlings dying to all the White Walkers out there. As long as they can't get past the wall, why are we gonna let the wildlings in here? But a couple of the thoughts I had when you're pointing out that where the army he should have led with is the stronger one, which I think I pretty much agree with. Except here's a difference: is that in Jon's mind, there are people and we need to help them.
Right.
A1. And by the way, from a practical standpoint, we don't want more walkers out there. That's how he's thinking of it.
Right. He should have reversed that.
Right, yeah. I think as a leader he should have, but it makes sense the way he did it.
Yes.
It's new for him to be a leader. He was hesitant about this in the first place. Aemon kind of pushed him into it. He is in a position where he kind of has to act sooner than later, so it's not going to be ideal and fully thought out. But I will also say, another thing about this that I'm kind of happy about is that Jon's not leaving the wall to go south. That is one thing I was worried about. I didn't think Davos' argument was convincing. I think too many times he stood his ground for the sake of his vows, and I didn't want him to suddenly change here, unless something really big or significant happened, which I can make up a bunch of things that might be, but it's got to be like a totally new thing. I feel like Jon needs to stay at the wall for the sake of how his character's been developed, or maybe not so much stay at the wall. Not go south. Not go to Winterfell.
Not get involved. Again, not get involved in the politics of the realm. He needs to do his job, stick to his vows. Like you said, he's done a good job of sticking to his vows. He's been tested several times this season, and he stuck to it. He wasn't tempted with the offer of Winterfell. He avoided the temptation of Melisandre, and
she would have convinced me.
She probably would have convinced most people. But let's see. So we also have Stannis and Davos talking about the wildlings. Davos once argues for waiting and saying, "Hey, let's get to see what happens with the wildlings. Maybe we can get them in our army." Stannis says, "No, our advantage is now. Our advantage is wasting away. We're allowing Roose to gather his strength, to consolidate his power. That's more important that we strike now than when we have a lot of manpower." And something that doesn't get mentioned. Here's one of those rare times we'll mention something from the books. It's very mild, but it's mentioned that having the wildlings in Stannis' army would be very bad as far as politically. The wildlings, again, just like they're enemies of the Watch, they're also enemies of the Northerners. The Northerners hate the wildlings. They for so many, especially the far northern families, have suffered wildling raids for thousands of years, and they're just very prejudiced against the wildlings, and not for bad reason. So Stannis joining with the wildlings is bad politically, and that's something they didn't really bring up, but it bears mention here. Stannis may not have mentioned it, but I can pretend that he was thinking it and that it was a good thing. And it really does make sense. You're like, no, you can't have wildlings in your army. It just makes you look real bad. That's not a good way to embolden yourself to the Northerners. Is what Stannis is trying to save the North, to have the North rise for him. Having wildlings in his army is not going to help with that.
Another thing has occurred to me here, which caused another thing to occur to me here. I want to point out, first of all, that it's barely been 12 hours since I've seen it. And so a lot of times on these episodes, I'm like thinking of new stuff as we talk about it, including we had kind of talked about themes and motifs in past episodes.
Yeah, there wasn't much of a theme this episode.
I think there might have been,
Okay.
because we keep mentioning this idea of how this kind of going against the grain, that it's hard for John to convince these people this tradition that's been there all along that they have to change, and he's sort of joining forces with the enemy to do it. Well, look at where else this is happening. Sansa is marrying Bolton.
Mm-hmm.
Dany is marrying Hisdar.
Oh, yes.
You know what I mean? I think there might be a little bit of like the recognition of getting over it. You look, things have been this certain way in the past, and there's been strife. If we're going to move forward, we got to join forces, even if it's not popular, even if it's not what you want, even if it's not the expected or the tradition. Kill the boy.
Compromise is a bit of growing up and accepting the hard truths, accepting the things you don't want to accept to get the results you need to get. That's good. You're right. It is sometimes hard to pick out the themes. The last few weeks, some of them have been very obvious. I think we've been able to pick them out, but I didn't even bring up themes this time because I couldn't think of too many.
Sometimes I wonder if I'm just reading in. Once you decide
No,
something, you try to find it everywhere, but think of how Tyrion and Jorah are starting to get along here. Started off pitted against each other, but now they kind of brought together. Anyway, just a thought that popped into my head.
No, I think you nailed that. I think that was right on top. So the meeting in the mess hall. This is where we have Dolorous Ed, reacting. We have his objection. We have Alistair Thorne and others kind of echoing him. We talked about Jon's argument and how it should be flipped, but we also have a great moment where Stannis is a grammarian. It's the second time in the series that he has corrected someone by saying fewer instead of lesser or less, and it gives me such a chuckle. I'm really glad to see Stannis getting fleshed out more as a character, becoming a great leader. It was an early complaint of a lot of fans, that especially fans of Stannis, that the show wasn't doing him justice, and they seem to be really fixing that. Stannis has really been more around it. He's funny. He's a good leader, and you don't have to agree with all his decisions. He's very cold, he's harsh, but he's got that. They've even given him that sensitive side with the way he treats Shireen. So he's really been fleshed out as a character. Does that just mean he's going to die soon now that we like him?
Hope not. It might mean he's going to do something terrible now. That's another pattern I recognize, is they keep us from liking a character too much. We could go on and on, but I feel like there's a lot of examples where someone is doing a lot of good, positive things, and then they do this one terrible thing, Maybe Stannis is going to sacrifice Shireen next.
So we have the Team Dragonstone, folks, we'll call them. We have Shireen talking about her interest in the Winterfell crypts, which was really neat. I wonder where that's headed. I have a hard time imagining what Shireen, how she could be interacting with the crypts in a meaningful way, other than that she's got an interest in history. But I thought that was a really cool mention, and I have no idea where it's headed. Did that mention strike you at all, or was that?
I thought it was pretty interesting. Yeah, I think Shireen's an interesting character. I feel like she has maybe some elements of Arya. Like she's.
They're about the same age.
And also, I think she might have a little bit of. I mean, they're not connected or related, but just like comparing characters, she's clever. She's sassy in the way that Sansa is.
Were you bored a lot too?
Yeah.
Yeah. She's still got a little of her father's. Get to the pointedness of it.
Yeah.
His real talk. So, and of course we have Selyse.
But it seems stifled by her mom.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. Selyse being extremely unpleasant as usual, comes in and no more talk about battles. And then she gives a disapproving look of how Shireen is looking at Jilly, and she's like, keep away from those wildlings. It's like, God, you are so unpleasant. Jeez, total killjoy, this woman.
By the way, that was the Mother's Day episode, right?
Yeah.
Didn't they kill Tywin on Father's Day?
Yes. And Dany had, we'll get to it, but Dany had a Mother's Day speech, basically. A mother doesn't abandon her doesn't give up on her children.
Yeah, that's right.
No matter how much they get out of line, a mother does not abandon her children. And I was like, yeah, Mother's Day right there. So we're actually about to head into Essos and talk about that. But real quick, one other thing. I really liked the shot of the soldiers leaving Castle Black, the column of knights. That was really cool. It had good music. All of Stannis' army marching. They kind of drew it out just a little bit of having him mount up and everything. It was really, watching the second time especially, it really hit me. Because they don't usually do that. A lot of times they rush. And some of these scenes in this episode I felt were a little rushed. Some plot points were rushed past. They were done really quickly. We've already mentioned that in past episodes of the season. So whenever they draw something out like that, it's to show the visuals. I usually appreciate it, and this was no exception. I liked that, even though I don't know if it had any deeper meaning to it. Did you think it had any?
I thought it was the end of the episode. I thought it was just such a sort of big climactic moment. I thought it was, and they've ended on moments like that at the wall before too. So I thought it was going to be the end of the episode. So.
there were 2 points where the episode seemed like it was ending.
Yes.
Which the other one, of course, being Tyrion and Jorah, when Tyrion is apparently drowned or drowning. So that did look like I watched the episode and I was like, that can't be the end right here. And then I watched it with you because you came home from work and you said the same thing. You're like, that can't be the end. I'm like, that's what I said.
Yeah.
So good thing that didn't happen.
It was even long enough of like a stall. And again, I can't help but think, especially talking about all the production effort that goes into this, it's partly by design. The amount of time they spent with a blank screen there, I guarantee that's based on some sort of study that they did, how long people wait till they look away or pause or fast forward or whatever, Yeah,
I was expecting credits to appear any second. Then once a certain number of time passed, it was like, okay, they're clearly not going to appear. This scene isn't over yet. And then, yay, it wasn't.
Because they've even had episodes end with no music. That's a thing that they've done before.
Or delayed music.
So I almost wonder if they did decide, especially because the music that did come, Shay even pointed out that it didn't quite fit the moment with Jorah there, that it was like this boom, 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 this kind of ominous sort of a march, which I think would have fit the ending better if it was the army leaving Winterfell. You know what I'm saying? I wonder if that was like an editing decision to switch to further convince us to the psych out of the end of the episode.
Yeah, you might be right. There might have been a specific psychologically specific time frame involved there, and how many seconds of blackness they left there.
It was long enough for me to wonder, to even have a negative thought go through my mind. I was like, man, it's not like Game of Thrones to have a cliffhanger like that. I'm disappointed that they would. Oh, they didn't. Okay.
That's funny. So let's go ahead and move on to Essos. We got a couple different things going on at Essos. We start with Tyrion and Jorah. We have a little bit more of Tyrion kind of talking his way into Jorah's good graces. He's a good talker. He's really good at making people like him more, and he brings up that hilarious line, sullen silences and the occasional punch to the face. The Mormont way. That was hilarious. Good tension breaker. And it just shows how, like you said, by the end of this whole series of scenes at Valyria and the Smoking Sea, we do have, I made the same observation you did, that Jorah is treating Tyrion better. He's treating him, I guess having a near-death experience together kind of brings people together. But also now they're going to be walking together. He can't really be a captive. They're sort of companions. And Jorah knows that Tyrion, or at least he believes the story that Tyrion was heading towards Dany anyway. So, what was your impression of this ruined Valyria and this whole scene of this river and the ancient ruins and all this talk? Give me your impressions of that. This is something that us book readers have had kind of in our head for a long time, but to you, I guess it was relatively fresh. Did you have a preconceived notion of what Valyria would look like ahead of this, or was it similar, or was it completely new to you, or what?
I had a vague idea. There was, I think I remember a story of how one of the kings, or someone that had a blade, was it a Lannister maybe? Someone that had the metal? A Valyrian steel blade in the family that had been lost, and they went there to try to find it, and then got lost and never returned.
You're right, that was a Lannister. That was Tyrion's uncle.
Okay.
Tywin's youngest brother. Jaime Lannister.
Yeah. And I had heard the doom had been talked about, and in my mind I kind of equated it to like Pompeii in Rome, that like some catastrophic event, earthquakes and volcanoes had gone off and just demolished a civilization that was once great or whatever. I'm not exactly sure what I expected. I hadn't really dwelled on it very much. But on one hand, I don't think it's quite what we did see here, because this seemed more like abandoned than destroyed. It seemed kind of overgrown and unkept. But also I can imagine Valyria isn't like a city or an island. It's maybe
It was a whole peninsula.
continent, or like the size, right?
Yeah.
So I can imagine, like, I remember even going, considering the map, and I can imagine if in Westeros 20 volcanoes could go off and it not even affect King's Landing. You know what I mean?
Other than the atmosphere above it, probably.
Right, and maybe in the long term it would like cloud the atmosphere and crops couldn't
things like
grow.
that, yeah.
But it wouldn't, like, all the castles wouldn't crumble to the ground or get covered with molten lava or something
Exactly.
like that. But they might be abandoned by civilization and get grown over the vines. And so, this spot that they're going probably wasn't the heart of the doom of Valyria. It's probably the outskirts around the rim where maybe some destruction had occurred and it had been abandoned, but wasn't like run over with molten lava.
I think you have to be right, because they were skirting, if not fully in committing a bit of an inconsistency in the end of in the season 1 histories and lore videos, which are usually part of the Blu-rays, I believe. They have a series of short 2 to 5 minute videos where they talk about certain historical topics and background stories, and they mention the Doom of Valyria, and it is volcanic. That's the main thing that happened there. So it's a bit of an inconsistency that they didn't portray it this way. But as you say, it's a whole subcontinent. It's a very large place, and you're right, they're just around the outskirts here. They're not necessarily in the center of it all. So I can kind of understand that. That's not too bad. Also, it doesn't really make a lot of sense for them to blow a lot of their budget on something they're only going to see for one scene.
Yeah.
And they did some other things to make it cool in the meantime. The description and the background, the way they talked about it, was really cool. The poem was great. I really liked that poem. By the way, that poem is not from the books. They wrote that entirely for the show. So good job, showrunners there, or whichever writer came up with that. And then we had the 2 big moments, some action. We have Drogon flying above, and Jorah is kind of in awe, even though he's seen Drogon before. Tyrion is completely, caught off guard and like, wow. He stands up, he stares up, and his facial reaction is great. And that sets them up for not noticing the stone men. But what did you think about seeing Drogon there? What did you think about that?
A couple things. One, I wanted to give a little more of an answer to your original question was,
Sure.
It was a reminder that this is an adventure. This is like a new land, and there was a little bit of intrigue and a sense of danger, even because you remember, I remember Tyrion kind of like stopped mid-sentence talking to Jorah. Because Jorah kind of saw they were coming up on it. Tyrion turned, oh, I know, there's it's a lot of times the show is like, cold, calculated conversations in the dark rooms of Winterfell, but sometimes they're out on a boat going to a forbidden land, so it was kind of exciting, I will say, to be reminded of some of the adventure of the show. Also, I wonder how coincidental it was that the dragon was there. I wonder if maybe he was drawn to that. It's his homeland. How many times has he gone there already? Did he sense that Tyrion was there, maybe? I don't know how mystical things could be here, but it was interesting at a minimum. It was definitely also neat to Jorah seeing the dragon as kind of maybe a I don't know if a reminder of home is quite the right word. I don't know what he thinks is home anymore, but the home he seems to want to get to right now,
Yeah, you wonder what he was thinking. He's like, "Wow, this dragon is pretty far from Marine right now."
yeah. I wonder if he's thinking that Dany's nearby, maybe, or his. I can't remember what the state of the dragons were when he left. Had she locked him up? Was he still around when she locked him up?
That's a good point. I don't remember if they had been. I think they had been locked up, but I'm not clear on that.
I think he was banished, and then they were locked up.
It's very close. They were very close together.
Yeah.
In any case, again, we hear the same. It's like this dragon motif, the same song that they play, that same haunting, sad dragon music that was originally. I think the first time it was played was in that scene when the dragons were locked up in the catacombs, and it was very sad, especially the look on Dany's face, because she did some good facial acting there. Amelia did, and every time that music comes back, it just makes me think of that scene, which was really pretty emotional. It was a really well done scene. So, good job of bringing that back through music. I appreciated that, and it's immediately just taken over by this action sequence. As soon as we have this moment where it's like sad and there's awe. They're like, wow, dragon, and then boom, what was that? Splash, and then all of a sudden there's a stone man on the boat with them. and they're fighting. I wasn't expecting the stone men to be so nimble, but it's not really a problem. It was just a bit of a surprise. And so I'm not exactly sure how they wound up so far away underwater. We'll just, the show is kind of takes liberties with distance, I think, in a few spots. This is not necessarily their strong point, but there's not much to say about that. The big thing, Jorah having grayscale, that's the thing to talk about. What do you think about that? That is a major, major development. He is a infected. He just got through talking about it. Don't let them touch you. Don't let them touch you. Now Jorah is the man that no one should be touching.
Yeah. There's lots I don't know about it, and how quick. Like my first thought when it was on, I was like, "Whoa, that's quick! It's already like appeared." I thought it. Does it have a dormancy period? Is it the instant you touch, you get it? How long does it take to spread once you do get it? Like, is this something that's like 3 days from now it's going to be all up his arm, or 3 months from now it's going to be all up his arm? If he has it on that spot on his arm, now he's infected. Can he touch Tyrion with his other hand and it's okay? Or if any part of him touches any part of anyone? I don't know.
And how did he get it? Did he get it from one of the stone men touching him, or was it just, did he get it from the water?
Had he gotten it before?
That's even possible, yeah. Well, that brings up another question. Do you think Tyrion might have it too? Like, all those are good questions. Did he have it? Is it latent? Could it come later? Could he get it? Just he's going to be around Jorah so much in the coming.
I'm going to assume from the way they presented it to us that he got it from being touched, and you won't get it unless you're touched by a portion of it, not just by someone that has it. I'm going to assume it's not. Although we already know that Shireen got it from a doll. You know what I mean? It doesn't necessarily have to be the skin or active. Yeah. But maybe it was a doll that she had all the time, touching to her cheek in her crib. Maybe not the same as an incidental, your hand touched a sword that someone held one time,
You're definitely right to point out that we do not know entirely how it works.
Yeah.
And if it may have a supernatural element to it, which makes it even harder to understand and predict. So that's a good starting point there for, this is going to be big. But we don't know exactly how big. And
I'm going to assume that he's not going to just degenerate to terribleness in 3 days.
Yeah,
he's going to keep it hidden. It's not going to spread to Tyrion until they get to Dany. I'm also kind of assuming they're going to get to Dany. I'm kind of thinking forward. This is what I kind of think, expect, hope for, whatever. Because at that point, then I wonder what's going to happen. Will Dany accept him when he comes back? If she does accept him when he comes back, will she accept him even if he has grayscale? Does that make it worse? Does that make her maybe have a soft spot? Oh, I can't banish him with grayscale too. That's more than I want to be put on him. As angry as I am.
She obviously didn't want to kill him in the first place. She sent him.
And but also, is it or will she recognize it as being a threat to the city for someone grayscale to be there? Will it spread? How contagious is it?
Yep.
I also wonder. This is the thing I was wondering. We saw the scene with Tyrion and Varys. They kind of stopped to listen to that priest, that woman.
The Red Priestess, yeah.
Which referenced some grayscale there. And she referenced Dany as a savior, right? They even later on talked about how priests and prostitutes both are looking up to this queen, And the Red Priests, they're associated with fire. Maybe Dany is a savior. Maybe she is, whether she knows or wants to be, or maybe she'll be thought of as being connected to the Red God. If she isn't actually, I wonder if she could cure the grayscale. I wonder if that's like a power she might have. Anyway, I don't know.
So here's another question that is related to Tyrion and Jorah, not directly related to this scenes in this episode, but backing up an episode. How did Jorah recognize Tyrion? This question comes from the Canadian dude from our YouTube channel. A couple others had a similar question. How did he know that was Tyrion? That's a very good question. I had to actually think about it for a while. I think that he must have overheard him talking. Maybe he recognized his accent. It's not clear what language Tyrion was speaking there in the brothel. If he found someone that he spoke the common tongue to, that would be a bit of a giveaway. It's possible in show canon Tyrion and Jorah have encountered each other. In the books, I don't think they had prior to any of that. But also Tyrion is a lot more distinct looking in the books, so that helps. But in the show, it's a little unclear. I think there's a reason. It could be an oversight. It could be just a continuity error. But I think there's enough wiggle room for thinking that maybe they encountered each other in the past, or that he recognized his voice via his accent. Not that he knew what Tyrion sounded like, but that he recognized the Westerosi accent.
Especially if you add to that, he's a dwarf. Jorah would certainly be aware of Tyrion's existence and of him being a dwarf. Had blonde hair.
Mm-hmm.
And in the conversation with the prostitute, he said something along the lines of, until recently, I was a very wealthy man. And he also said, I'm known for paying my debts. If Jorah heard any of that stuff, it would
That's
be...
true.
Yeah.
I didn't get the impression that Jorah was listening to their conversation at that point, because that was one of the first things he said, but that would definitely explain it.
Yeah.
So
also, Tyrion may have said that many other times. He might have been drunk and reckless in what he was doing. Varys didn't want him to go into the city, you know.
So let's move on to Marine. We're still in Essos here. Hisdar, we get some new info on Hisdar. We get Dany's Mother's Day speech that I mentioned before. I thought it was Dany's handling of Barristan's death. First of all, Barristan's death has caused an extreme amount of dismay and frustration from the fandom. It was one of the biggest outcries I've seen since we've been following the show. Well, I've been following the show the whole time, but since we've been covering the show, of course, only is a lot less time. But let's just say, since the show has been a thing at all, it's one of the biggest points of outcry that I've seen. Not much to be done about that. Barristan's gone. It's very sad. It was very tragic, and it drove Dany to do something that Barristan would not have approved of. But it may have been necessary. What do you think? Dany, of course, backtracked on her decision. She kind of thought she did something wrong. But it's tough because the masters probably are at least somewhat responsible. Maybe not all of them, but she's not wrong probably that they're involved. What do you think about that? What did you think, first of all, about her decision to execute one of them like that in such a terrifying way, and then follow that up with what you think about how she changed her mind and kind of circled back and fixed the situation?
Well, I'm glad she circled back. I don't know if she's fixed the situation.
No, she certainly hasn't fixed it, although she's trying to.
Even if overall everyone buys into this, if you will, okay, she's bringing the fighting pits back. She's marrying this former slave owner family. She's making good political moves. That family, they're not going to forgive her, no matter what.
Nope.
Just like the people on the wall aren't going to go along with the wildlings. You know what I mean? Like that.
Good point.
And a big part of her stance was, I guess, to be
she even
clear,
pointed out, she even says, this might not be, none of you may be responsible, or maybe all of you are.
Yeah. I was going to say a big part of her stance, and I realized it wasn't necessarily a big part of her stance. It became a big part of a stance that she took on under Barristan's advice to give a trial. There's no trial for these guys. And it seems like there could have been, at least before you freaking feed one alive to a dragon, you could have some pretense of a trial. Maybe there even was some trial that we just didn't see and it would have taken too much screen time. But I get the idea that we're supposed to see her go too far here, that she's doing what she wouldn't normally do. She doesn't feel she's out of options. She's digging a deeper hole, etc., etc. And again, it is understandable, although it is still, I feel like, it's not exactly in the heat of the moment. There's a lot of coordination to round these guys up, right? It's in the heat of the moment, she can have Hisdar arrested. That's one thing. In the heat of the moment, she can have someone's head chopped off. But in the heat of the moment, you can't have multiple people rounded up, gathered together, brought into the crypt, give this speech, push one of them in. You know what I mean? That was a lot of planning, coordinated, premeditated decision making.
She may have made the decision to do it when she was at her most angry, but she didn't. Yeah. It took her a while to circle back and maybe realize that she had made a mistake. If she even thinks it was a mistake. She certainly changed her tactics. That doesn't mean she thinks that what she did before was a mistake. She just thinks that, at the very least, she thinks that something else might work better. It wasn't exactly... Well, she did admit it was a mistake to Hisdar. She said, I was wrong to do that. But that doesn't necessarily mean... It doesn't necessarily mean she totally feels that way. She might just be saying to Hisdar, hey, she's just trying to be amiable and say, look, you were right.
I'd feel a little better if at least the one guy who did get killed there, if we had some idea that he's at least more likely to be involved. If there had been some conversation with him in the past, some insubordination that came from him or his family,
That would have
rather
made a
than
little
just
more sense, yeah.
one. What if he was like the one noble guy? You know what I mean? And everyone else was in on it, and he didn't want to go along, and he's the one that got killed. I wish we had some minor little bit of insight or background to who he was and how and why he was the one that was thrown forward there. And again, it's one thing to use peer pressure. I think a large part of what she's doing there is peer pressure. Like,
Don't
you
support
might,
these
right,
under these. This
you might all be
movement.
innocent, but since I don't know, you're all in trouble. And if the people who do know come out, then well, da 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 da. You're afraid if you rat out the other guys, they'll turn on you. Well, guess what? If you don't rat the other guys, I'm going to kill you. Like, I don't agree with that, but I understand that line of thinking, especially from a dictator, which it seems like she's trying to not be a dictator, but she is.
She's trying to be a benevolent dictator, I think.
Right. But I feel like you start somewhere, some lighter level of peer pressure other than eaten alive. You know what I mean?
I think she feels
chop
like
someo's finger off.
Yeah.
Put their son in jail.
Take hostages.
There's a lot of other steps you could do. And maybe it's another 2-for-1 here. She's trying to like remind everyone she's Mother Dragons. Dario said, "Hey, Queen with no dragons." Da da da.
It also says something that her Barristan wasn't around to be giving her good advice anymore, and now it's Dario who's a lot bloodier.
I think it's the worst thing that Dany's done.
Really?
I
Okay.
think can you think? What's the worst? In the past, I didn't like how she burned the witch alive.
Yeah, that was.
I feel like that woman on some level was justified. She
Yeah.
had been raped, her people had been killed and murdered and some pillaged, the whole thing.
She had a right to vengeance.
It's not crazy for her to want some kind of revenge.
Yeah.
And she also on. I'm slightly more justifying Dany there because you can also see why Dany would want revenge. She did try to protect the woman and her people and got repaid in this way. And also on some level, it might have been part of this ceremony. It wasn't purely vindictive. She wanted to have that. She felt this unnatural drive, this what's the word supernatural drive to have this ceremony, including a sacrifice to birth the dragons. I can come up with ways in my mind to maybe justify it. She's more immature.
She's also the Mad King's daughter.
Yeah, maybe there's just freaking crazy in her. But I think she's made a lot of mistakes, and I think maybe she's been stubborn. Later on, I wish Missandei had maybe been a little more pointed with her in the same way that I think Barristan a couple times and other characters have in private been like, look, you're messing this thing up. I think Missandei had the opportunity to tell her, I thought even that's where it was going. Hey, I've seen you ignore everyone's counsel before, which that's been like a complaint I've had of Dany and a reason I like Stannis. But then she's like, ignore everyone's counsel. Because you knew the better way. Like, oh, man. First of all, I'm not sure.
Well, she said sometimes.
To be fair, right. But,
because she went through the whole range. Like, sometimes I've seen you listen to advice. Sometimes, it was.
Yeah. But I think that this is, I think it's the worst thing that Dany's done. It's just kind of, again, I haven't thought too deep about this, but I'm pretty sure it's the worst thing she's done.
It felt, I definitely felt like it was unjust. And I struggled with it a little bit. But I've also, I do think that Dany's in a tough spot. I think that she has to do violent things to make these people come around, at least in some regard. I don't think but I don't think it should be indiscriminate like that. Yeah.
And it's a slippery slope.
Yes, very.
Tywin thought he had to do violent things to get people to come around. And
next
thing you know, you're eradicating an entire, city or family or whatever, So.
It's true. So we talk about Dany and Missandei, like you said. And so I thought the speech was a little awkward, but I thought the underlying message was fairly solid, that Dany is capable of making good decisions if she isn't too wrapped up, if she isn't too emotional about it. Especially, she definitely has that Targaryen temper thing going, where she reacts with fire, very literally this time. But when she stops to think, she is pretty smart. Like a lot of characters, that's a very common theme throughout the show and books, is that characters who react a lot of times regret their reactions. Characters who stop to think, well, to be fair, sometimes characters who stop to think wish they had reacted. So I mean, that's life. Sometimes it's better to react, and sometimes it's better to stop and think. And we don't always know at the time which is better. It's a hindsight is 20/20 kind of thing. Now, very quickly, I thought this was, and because I don't mean very quickly we're going to cover it, but it happened very quickly that Dany changed her mind. She comes in and has the scene with Hizdar, and just says she's going to reopen the pits and going to marry you. And I'm sure Hizdar is just like, do what now? What a turnaround! He's like, oh, I'm thinking I'm going to get fed to a dragon. Wait, no, I'm going to become king of Marine. That is kind of like winning the lottery. So, what did you think about that? A couple big questions here. What did you think about her decision to reopen the fighting pits? We'll start with that. What do you think about that?
I think that was like a gimme. I can't believe that was even an issue for her in the first place. That was
Yeah.
it seemed like such an easy compromise for her to make. She was just being stubborn.
And it was kind of telegraphed. It wasn't like there was a lot of other options presented to her as far as in the storyline. They weren't like, well, you could also do this or do this. These are these other Myronese traditions you can do. You can uphold.
Yeah.
Well, really, the fighting pits is really the only thing we've been really talked about. The only tradition, Myronese tradition, that's really been brought out is slavery, and Dany's obviously not going to bring that back. But what about the decision to marry Hizdar? That's the really big one now.
I would say we haven't seen a lot from Hizdar in the first place, but everything I've seen, I've liked. I thought he's been an interesting character and been wondering how more central he's going to be, and been frustrated almost every interaction he's had with Dany. I thought he was being reasonable and calm and, trying to do what seemed right, and maybe in the back of my mind some suspicion, but nothing, no real reason. And she's just been like, nope, screw you, screw you, screw you, And so even up there when I especially like that moment when he's like, every man must die. He's like, all right, here, if I'm gonna be put in a situation, let's do it. And then later on, he was kind of admitted. She's like, well, what about everyone? He's like, look, I'm trying to be brave, but I don't want to die. What do you want from me? Like,
yeah, he seems very reasonable, and he comes off as very honest. Now, because of the way the slaughter of the Unsullied, what wasn't a slaughter? The ambush of the Unsullied and the death of Barristan, that was clearly premeditated, of course, and that scene began during a speech of Hizdar. Mm-hmm. Which causes some people to suspect that maybe Hizdar is working against Dany after all. Maybe he just had this front of being reasonable. Do you think there's a chance that Hizdar is not what he seems? Is he part of the resistance movement? He's just a good political face, he's really good at seeming like he's on her side, that he's genuine. I haven't seen any clues for that in the show that he's not genuine, but it has to be considered. Genuine.
I mean, I guess you can consider it, but I think it would be, I don't know, poor writing of them to suddenly be like, aha, it was a trick all along. You know what I mean? He seems to be accepted by other people. He seems to be accepted and trusted by other men. He traveled with Daario to the other city, negotiated with those people. When does he have the opportunity for these secret meetings? He's a public figure. No one else is questioning him.
You'd think that Dany would maybe have him followed or watched, or Daario would. Now, but speaking of Daario, what about Dario's reaction to Dany getting married to Hizdar?
We haven't seen that. I don't know.
Dario's already expressed how he doesn't like. He's like, I'd tell her to cut your head off. So that Dario's kind of a wild card here. Surely Daario hasn't been thinking that he's going to marry Dany one day, but he can't like this.
Yeah. My hope is that his character will just be cool with it. He understands the big picture. If he really cares about Dany in the first place, et cetera, et cetera. We'll see. The fact is, I don't know for sure if she's going to marry Hizdar. She didn't actually say she's going to marry him. She said a suitor is on his knees. I'm assuming that the implications are all there, but I was also assuming that Littlefinger was going to get married.
Yeah. The other thing is they're just, who else? There's just no we haven't been introduced to other. It's one of these other things where there's just no other candidates. Like she could just bring they could introduce a new character and have her marry that guy.
Also, how much will it be just for show, right? Like, it seems like Ramsay's getting married to Sansa just for show. Robert got married to Cersei just for show. For the most part, I guess Cersei really loved Robert. But my point is that
for a minute,
it doesn't seem like Dany marrying Hizdar means that Dany can't have a relationship with Daario.
Right, that's true. Just like Miranda as Ramsay is telling Sansa, or Ramsay's telling Miranda that they can still have a relationship even though she's marrying Sansa. So maybe that's another theme of this episode. Women you're not women, but lovers on the side, hidden, political marriages, etc. Interesting. So let's move on to The North. One thing, though, before we start on the North, I want to re-mention that we've been getting a lot of great questions and feedback and predictions from you watchers out there, and we want to keep that going. It's gone very well. A lot of you guys have pointed out things that we didn't notice that we incorporate into the show, and that's great because there's too much to notice. And as Sean pointed out, we make this video within a day of the episode coming out. There's no way for us to catch everything in that time. No matter how thorough we are, there just isn't enough time to figure it all out, to think everything through. So we definitely rely on you all to help us fill in those gaps. So far, you've done a great job. Keep it up. Let's start with one of those very questions slash predictions in regards to the North and the Brienne and Sansa, or rather Brienne and Podrick and Sansa and all these. Watcher Josh Glazer suggests that an interesting parallel. Brienne potentially rescuing Sansa is ironic because Sansa is the one who always used to dream of heroic knights and heroic rescues. And the person that's coming to rescue her is a woman, not some handsome knight. But Brienne is probably the most knightly person in the whole series as far as living up to the ideals of knighthood. So it's a really brilliant piece of irony. Good catch there, Josh. And it also shows the interest of a parallel between Brienne and Sandor, whereas Sandor is also critical of knighthood. He's not an ideal knight by any means, but he's not a knight, but understands knighthood better than just about anybody. And he was somebody that had a lot of a lot of closeness with Sansa in the earlier stages of the series. And it's funny how these characters who have been saviors for Sansa have been not knights. One who is the epitome of knighthood who isn't a knight, and one who is also not a knight but hates knighthood and thinks it's a really hypocritical thing. So I love the interplay there of the hypocrisy and the irony of all that.
Interesting. There is, I think, Sansa has a third savior in Littlefinger.
Yeah.
Also not a knight, also not knightly.
Yeah, not at all. He may, but his end game for her may not be so pleasant, or may not have her best interest in mind. But you're not wrong that he has saved her from things. He may be saving her just to make things worse for her.
You know what? You know who else saved her? There's another knight that saved her. He actually was a knight. Not a very good knight. Dantos.
Oh yeah, Dantos. You're right. Through
not exactly like the handsome, charming character that she envisioned, but
yeah, that was Littlefinger set that up, but definitely Dantos did it, and he wasn't he definitely deserves some credit. Well, some credit, credit from the grave. Now, another Watcher, Hart Johnson, predicts that Brienne will find herself having to choose between her revenge on Stannis and saving Sansa. That's an interesting point. I don't know that will come to pass, but it could. What do you think she will choose? If it comes down to that, which will she choose? Which vow is bigger to her? Which is more important to her? Her revenge or her vow to save Sansa?
I think the vow to save Sansa. I think that's what Brienne, quote unquote, should choose.
It is more knightly than revenge.
On some hand, the thing is, even saving Sansa is still part of a vow that she made to a person that's dead. And she had a vow to Renly, who's dead. But Sansa's Sansa herself is still alive, so it's more meaningful to save her. And B, the vow to Renly would also be tainted by a sense of revenge. And so I think she should. I think if Brienne is, the righteous person that she seems to be, that the more righteous of those two things is to save Sansa.
There's another point here that several Watchers have brought up that I think is really on point, and it's something that I wanted to bring up myself at some point. I had thought about it, and this is as good a time as any, and that's that what right does Brienne have to take revenge on Stannis? Stannis is totally in the right. Renly was, by all the laws, a complete and total usurper. Stannis followed the law. Stannis is right. Stannis is the legal inheritor of the throne. He's completely and totally right. And killing a traitor is totally acceptable by all the laws of Westeros. Even murdering one, even assassinating one, even maybe people frown on using blood magic and shadow magic and all that stuff. But the actual killing of Renly is completely justified. And if I would love to see Brienne faced with that. Faced with that is like, look, maybe even from Stannis himself, saying, look, how dare you judge me? I am the rightful king. Bottom line, Renly was a usurper. You served a traitor.
Maybe it'll come from Davos.
Yeah, it could be. I don't know. I really hope that comes up.
Also, by the way, even if it is, here's the thing: even if it is justified and legal, it still doesn't mean it's going to sit well with her or
I agree.
people.
I agree.
It's some, we'll just say that murder is bad, but some murder is worse than others. And in fact, they even have a word for it when you kinkiller, kinslayer.
Yes.
This is also kinslaying.
That is very frowned upon.
Even
yes.
if it's okay to kill the usurper, maybe it should be someone outside the family who kills the usurper.
Kinslaying is definitely, you're not wrong. Kinslaying is at the top of the list of worst crimes to commit. Again, period. Especially in the North, but everywhere.
But like, well. would Tywin have been thought less of for being a kinslayer if he had Tyrion executed?
Well, he didn't swing the sword.
Because there was a trial as well.
But yeah, maybe. Some people might have thought that. Some people might have
and also, by the
way,
Tyrion is a kinslayer at this point, right? So
yep. Definitely. No, there's no way around that one. No matter what theory you subscribe to, Tywin is Tyrion's family.
Yeah.
So that's a very good point. So this is a really interesting kind of philosophical conundrum there. You're right that Stannis is sort of guilty of kinslaying. Although was he? It wasn't literally him, right? It was a shadow that had his face. Like that's a real gray area, shadowy area. So it's I think that's a very interesting discussion point, and it really gets to it's a very tough decision. Like seeing the right in that is really hard, and it just almost boils down to, well, I believe these laws matter more to me. I care more about kinslaying than I do about being being a traitor. So this is justified. Killing, someone that I love. You killed someone that I love. That's more important to me than these laws. There's an argument for that to be made too. So really good moral conundrum there.
By the way,
I hope the show delves deeper into it.
I had kind of a dark thought just now of where things might go. I feel like couple times Brienne has said something to the effect of, there's nothing worse than not being able to protect the ones you love. And she has this oath and this vow to save Sansa. I wonder if Sansa might die. I wonder if she's going to fail.
What do you
not be able to protect Sansa?
That's actually my next question for you. Do you think at this point, with the information you have at this point, do you think Brienne will succeed in rescuing Sansa? Or in taking revenge on Stannis? You can answer those separately.
I don't know. I definitely I've been pondering it a lot. There's so many ways it could go down.
It's a tough question. It's a tough question to ask. Kind of put you on the spot there.
Yeah, I've gone through a bunch of sort of if thens, and a lot of times I try to think about the most likely based on the personalities of the characters. But I don't even know which character is going to be involved. In fact, finding out that Shireen and Sleece are going with Stannis to the Wall makes me think that Shireen's going to get sacrificed. That's like a fear that I have. But sometimes I think about, well, what's the most tragic thing? Because that's got to be a high consideration.
What would be the worst thing they could do here?
And a lot of times I think about what's the thing that could be. I don't know how to say this, but from a literary standpoint, what would make the most sense of storylines, how they're going to tie together symbols and foreshadowing that have been given. And it kind of depends on how long this gets drawn out, because I feel like, as a rule of thumb in Game of Thrones, just because you're a main character or a good character doesn't mean you're going to win or even live, right?
That is not how it works.
But I also don't necessarily expect the end of the whole story to be all the good main characters die tragically. I don't necessarily.
That wouldn't be realistic either.
Right. So I can see if it goes long enough, maybe Sansa ends up as Wardeness of the North, but
could happen.
I can also see her dying.
Could happen.
I can see Miranda killing her. I can see
could happen.
Ramsay killing her.
Could happen.
There are. I've also thought about what I want to happen. Fair
enough to throw that out there. We know we probably won't get exactly what we want, but
there's also other things too that I guess we'll probably talk about a little bit here. But Bran and Rickon are still alive, and it may not come into play this season, but I wonder if it will come into play because Sansa dies, and then they're like, oh wait, no, there's still another Stark, or if it'll come into play because Sansa marries Ramsay, but oh, that doesn't matter because there's still another Stark, or excuse me, so many different ways that could play out, and my fear that a likely thing to happen is 2 or 3 characters I like are gonna die.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine all of our favorites making it to the end. The only way that could happen is if you have no favorites, or if you have one favorite. Because if you have one favorite, that one person might make it. But you're kind of putting all your eggs in one basket, aren't you?
Yeah, but I can see maybe Davos presenting that argument about Stannis to Brienne. Mm-hmm. Brienne not accepting it, killing Davos.
Ooh.
That's
Please
the
don't
thing.
kill Davos.
Yeah, that's the thing I can see happening.
I think Davos might be my number 1 favorite character.
Really? Yeah. I have a hard time picking. I've
yeah,
talked
that's
about
why
it
I said
before,
might be. It's really hard.
Especially if I feel like when you pick main characters, you kind of need to distinguish between, I don't know how to say this, primary characters and even secondary. I feel like there's tertiary characters too.
It's hard to say who is what, you know.
Right. Because partly when you're picking a main character, it's going to be largely influenced by how much screen time they've had, how many lines they've had, how much the story is connected to them, how much background you've gotten on them. And so characters like Jon and Sansa and Arya, who've been around, who get scenes almost every episode, da da da. But then there's, and among them, I'll say I think that Sansa's my favorite character.
Okay.
Then there's characters, and it might be harder to distinguish quite between secondary and tertiary, but a combination of how long they've been around. Like some characters that might be your favorite died in season 1, and they're not still around for you to be thinking about or considering. Whereas some characters have only been around for 1 season, but they're in your face right now, so they might be higher on your list, you know. But I think of the second tier characters, second and third tier, I'll say, characters that are still around. I think Bronn is my favorite down there with Jaime. But but it's a lot of tough decisions. It's I do also like Stannis a lot. He's definitely one of my favorites, and I love Sandor a lot, and he's not around anymore. But anyway, a tangent. Sorry.
That's okay. It's all related. It's all good.
I can imagine Theon killing Ramsay. That's another thing I can see that easily happening. It's Theon killing Ramsay. That Theon just not being able to handle it. Like, wanting to tell Sansa that he didn't really kill the boys. Sansa maybe being tortured by Ramsay, and he just can't, Theon just can't handle seeing that. I can see him being pushed too far. And I feel like maybe not, that seems to be what Ramsay did, is just take away who he used to be. But I just don't think he really did. I don't think he completely did it. I think we see shame in Theon around Sansa.
Yes,
and
I
I
agree.
think that could boil over to him just stabbing Ramsay in the back when he's got Sansa in some torture chamber.
Before we had Theon obeying completely, but there was no one pulling him in any other direction. Now he's confronted face to face with something, an object of guilt for him, referring to Sansa as an object, but still. So let's talk about these Winterfell scenes. This is a lot of very interesting stuff. This is a very big focus of the episode. We start with Miranda and Ramsay, which is I think there's some irony in this scene. Miranda talking about acting jealous, and Ramsay's kind of threatening her. Well, not kind of, definitely, definitively threatening her with, "You're not going to bore me, are you? You know what happens to people who bore me." He's bored by jealousy, and then he gets jealous in a few scenes later when he finds out that Lady Walda is pregnant, and he gets real petulant and makes all these crass jokes. And so it's kind of ironic there that Ramsay is being a hypocrite. But the scene was interesting. There's an interesting bit of power dynamics there. Miranda kind of brings herself back out of it and behaves the way Ramsay wants her to, I suppose, and kind of plays nice. But then she goes out and gets real creepy with Sansa, like touching her. It's like, oh, the stitching, and I was trying to kind of needle her a little bit about, oh, who made this for you, and all this other stuff, and kind of bringing up some of the bad things that have happened to her, and then shows her Theon, and yeah, I was at first when the scene started, I was like, don't go in there. don't. Why would you do what Miranda wants you to do? This woman hates you. Don't go in there. She's totally jealous of you. But it was just Theon. It wasn't. Of course, it took me about halfway through. It's like, oh, Theon, of course. That's what's going on here. I should have realized that right away. What did you think of Sansa's reaction in the moment there from both their perspectives?
It didn't occur to me that it was going to be Theon until the moment it was Theon. I was definitely, several thoughts were going through my head. One was, one quick thought I had was like, it's pretty bold of Sansa to walk in all those dogs. Wait, Sansa used to have a wolf as a pet. Sansa just walk in here. She's faced worse stuff. This isn't that
Yeah,
bad
I mean,
for her.
the kennels were there when that's the Winterfell kennels.
Yeah. It's her home. She's been around direwolves. She's been around Joffrey. She can walk down this corridor.
As she says in the later scene, this isn't strange for me. This is my home. It's the people who are strange. And speaking of strange people,
as she was,
and Theon.
But as they were definitely building suspense, and I was, what dreadful thing could this be? And I thought it was gonna be like Caitlyn's head on a stake or something like that. That's what I was worried about. And I was also wondering, was Miranda doing this on her own, or was Theon putting it up? It seemed as though she did it on her own, because later on, Ramsay. Who knows what and why Ramsay's going to say things. That Ramsay might have put her up to this still, but
surely Ramsay couldn't have thought to keep Theon out of her sight the whole time. I mean, that never seemed very realistic.
And it might have made
it put any effort towards that.
And it might have been a mood to make Miranda happy too. Like, I tell you what, Miranda, go show Sansa Theon Stark. But I can also imagine Miranda doing it maybe to like push Theon's button. I keep saying Theon. Push Ramsay's buttons. Although I don't. Miranda's got a death wish if that's the case. The more I think about it, the more I think she was doing it under Ramsay's direction.
She could have, yeah. But if she was doing it on her own, I could see it either way. I could see her doing it under Ramsay's direction. I could see her doing it on her own. I'm not sure it matters a lot, but we'll probably find out. It's a bit of an interesting love triangle. Not really a triangle, considering Sansa doesn't love anyone there at this point. So, although she is aware that someone out there is trying to protect her. The old woman, presumably this is delivering Brienne's message of, light a candle in the tower. He's like, I don't know. That's not the best way to avoid danger. Like, oh yeah, hang on. I gotta
go to the top tower, light a candle so everyone can see.
Yeah, if I'm in danger, I'm surely if Ramsay's got you, about to torture you. Hold on, Ramsay. Hold that torture off for a second. Let me go light a candle. Just give me a second. Yeah, I don't know. Brienne's going to have to do a little better than that. But it's good that she sent a message to let Sansa know. Like, it probably at least makes Sansa feel better. Gets her hopes up. Maybe makes her feel like she's not as isolated, not as alone. There's someone out there that cares for her. And, of course, the serving people are all about that. We saw the certain...
It's possible it's independent, too, by the way. It's possible that the people independent of Brienne are making some effort
that
to
might not have been
her.
Brienne's message.
Yeah.
I assumed it was, but it doesn't have to be. So
before Brienne showed up, that woman said, "Hey, you saw friends in the north."
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you're right. That was the North remembers. That was one of the first things that happened when she got to Winterfell. No, certainly before Brienne got there, and we didn't even see how Brienne got there. She said she'd go around Mo Caelan. I don't know how she did that, but she just got there. She's near Winterfell somehow. But again, the show takes a few liberties with travel, but I don't mind that too much. It's not really exciting or all that interesting to have people travel on a TV show. So I wish that was a little more realistic, but I don't mind that in general that they don't pay a lot of attention to that because it isn't exactly all that. It's not the most entertaining thing. So let's talk about Theon and Ramsay. This location in Winterfell, as with all the locations, there are a lot of different one-on-ones and two-on-ones and short scenes, or not short scenes, but scenes with individuals at the same location. So we had a series of different scenes here that kind of went through a different process. Theon and Ramsay together. Scene was just really had me on edge. I personally, as someone with a musical background and a mother who has a musical background, anything that deals with maiming the hands always makes me uncomfortable. And man, it was almost worse that he forgave him. When he said, "I forgive you," I almost felt more creeped out. Like I didn't want to see graphic hand mutilation on screen. But I forgive you. It was somehow just as chilling. I was like, wow, that was a really good scene. Ewan Ryan is a great actor. His facial expressions, his like maniacal humor, especially in the following scene with the family dinner thing, he killed it this episode. Great acting. And it's funny because he, as a human being, as a person, as an actor, is like, whoa, my character is such a crazy evil guy. It really makes him uncomfortable how evil he is. And I don't think we've seen the worst yet. There's got to be more bad things coming. Ramsay hasn't really done anything terrible this season.
This is,
He's done plenty of terrible
hard
things.
to see much worse than what he's done to Theon.
Yeah, so it's just like, well, what's he going to do next? And I thought we were about to see what he was about to do next, and he didn't quite do it yet. Well, I guess I'm sorry,
He
I take it
skinned
back.
people alive
He
in front
skinned
of
the
their
Serwins.
son or whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that just happened off
We
screen.
didn't see it. Yeah,
I take that back. That definitely happened, but we just didn't see it. We saw the flayed corpses, which was pretty graphic, but technically we didn't see any
there's
torture
so many
on screen
different
from
ways
him.
for Ramsay to be terrible. Last season, this season, on screen, off screen.
He's got the whole thing covered. He's a terrible master. So we move on to that family dinner scene, which was possibly my favorite scene of the episode, even though it was so, it was so crooked and wrong, but not from a like production or acting standpoint or writing even. It was good in terms of TV. Another little Mother's Day reference there. Ramsay calls Lady Walda mother, and then they eventually talk about the birth of the child, or a pending birth of the child. There's a little bit of Mother's Day action thrown in there. And Ramsay makes a toast to the binding of the bloodline. Sansa does not drink. She sets the wine cup right back down, does not accept the toast. And that's when she delivers it's the people who are strange line. She is not holding back. I mean, she's not like, just, openly insulting them, but she's clearly not
As close
participating.
as she can get without, yeah.
Yeah. She's like doing that kind of courteous rejection and
Yeah.
being kind of keeping her cool, but definitely not playing along either. Especially when she had a chance to needle Ramsay when the whole notion of the birth came up. She looked at him, saw that he was disconcerted, and was like, I'm so pleased for you. Congratulations and all that.
She gave like a little subtle little smile, and Ramsay like flustered and drank his wine.
Yeah. So here's another watching her question. Tobin Irwin asks, what do the Boltons think Sansa knows about the Red Wedding? What do they think? From there, we know that Sansa knows that Roose was partly responsible, because she said so directly to Littlefinger. What do the Boltons think? Do you have any thoughts on that? What do you think their perspective is?
I'm assuming they know that she knows. I've gotten the feel that everyone knows. I wish I could be more specific about moments, but I feel like there were several times when people just knew. And but there's, what are we going to do is kind of the thing. So,
yeah.
And
they might be counting on Sansa just being helpless. They're like, what is this 13-year-old girl going to do if we, why is she a threat to us?
One, I was a little surprised that Sansa was so snippy and sassy with them. I thought she would play the game a little better. But maybe it's not as easy. Ramsay's not that much different from Joffrey, you know what I mean? So maybe it's not easy to play the game with a character like that.
Yeah, the forced apology was really, really an awkward moment there, but it also led to the idea that Theon is kind of the closest thing she has to kin around there, which is tying into what you were saying before about maybe Theon wanting to help Sansa, and that means they're going to be maybe seeing each other a little more, or having more to talk about a little bit, or maybe not, but it certainly puts them in a position of a little bit more closeness. And maybe supports the idea of Theon helping Sansa in some way or another, either helping her kill Ramsay or helping her escape, or a number of different possibilities.
Something we could be seeing this season is a couple more weddings. If Dany's going to marry his daughter and Sansa's going to marry Ramsay, those could be like pending moments.
Those could both happen as soon as the next episode. In fact, it may not happen that quickly, but the way the show is moving quickly. There's a lot of
some of the weddings have been bigger scenes than others. Like I feel like Tommen and Marjorie's wedding was like a scene, 30 seconds or whatever. Yeah, whereas other Joffrey
too dark happened there. Yeah. The Joffrey wedding was like a whole, like a big part of the
whole episode. Yeah, and the Red wedding was pretty much a whole episode too. But so they might be extended, they might put them together, they might be quick scenes, I'm not sure, but I think they're reasonable to expect to come soon here.
Yeah. Technically, of course, the interesting thing about Theon being the closest, quote unquote, closest kin is that obviously Bran and Rickon are still out there, and so is Jon.
Yeah. Although he was only a half or stepbrother in the first place, and is giving up vows. Like it's fair to not count him. There's no way John's gonna come give away Sansa.
No,
right?
Not gonna happen.
Another thought that I had there, just thinking about Sansa there, betrothed to Ramsay here, and she was to Joffrey before, and both times very clearly for her, and to some extent for other characters too. Like there was talk of having Arya getting married, and Cersei's marriage to Robert, and on and on and on. A lot of times, getting married is like going to prison. You know, like
Yeah.
it's a prison sentence.
In these patriarchal societies, especially for the woman, well, almost always it's for the woman, yeah.
Yeah.
And this is definitely seeming like Sansa is kind of effectively a prisoner of the Boltons, and her husband's a psychopath. Yeah, that is very.
And
much,
I guess she kind of knew it too. That's why she didn't want Littlefinger to leave her there.
Yeah.
But maybe, and on one hand, I think maybe she is or would or could be okay with it for the sake of revenge. But it seems like if she has some plot of getting revenge, she needs to get on her good side. She can't be quite as disrespectful or insubordinate or whatever she seems to be so far.
Well, I think she's not doing it too bad, because Ramsay
might be too caught up in himself
as well
to not notice or care. I'm just going to dominate this stupid girl anyway. I don't care.
I think he sort of expects that.
But Roose, I feel like I really like. I don't like Roose. He's a terrible person, but they're presenting him very well. I think he chose the right moment, like to put Ramsay in check there. Ramsay's going on and on, this whole thing.
You shamed yourself in there.
No, well, before that, at the
okay.
dinner even, which, by the way, again, it was a good job by the actor that plays Ramsay. That it was that one moment was like, whoa, it was getting really tense there.
Yeah, he was like,
now that that's over,
tense.
now it's not tense anymore. Let's eat, you know. Like, and
that was really good. Yeah.
When he proposes the Theon give him away, and he's like looking for cool. Is that cool, everyone? Dad, wife, is that
like,
cool? And finally,
like,
Roose
yes.
butts in. He's like, fine, that's fine. Let's talk about something else now.
Yeah, something that's going to make you unhappy.
Yeah.
By the way, since we're all together, my wife is pregnant.
Yeah. He put Ramsay in check. Because once again, remember I thought a couple episodes sometime recently, Ramsay was like eating, and Roose was like, stop eating and listen to me.
Yeah.
Look, I made you my son. I thought you were going to be better than this. Chill out for a second here, you know. And I feel like he had to do that again with Ramsay there.
And we get a sense too of in terms of the Sansa Ramsay dynamic. We see from the scene with Miranda, it actually gives us a bit of an insight as to how it might go with Sansa and what kind of behavior will work with Ramsay. When she was fighting back a little, when she bit his lip, and when she was like, no, I won't be. He responded positively to that.
Yeah.
So that's Sansa's way. If Sansa is a little bit kind of can tap into his personality and get at the things that he likes and gets it, taps into the things that he can, respect.
Strengths might
if she acts weak, if she's all meek and weak, that's going to be the kind of boring that I think.
Meek and weak might be, but disrespectful, he's not going to go for that either. She may need to show strength, but not disrespect.
She doesn't want to insult him. She doesn't want to refer to his bastardy. That would be I think that would be the wrong play. Yeah. But I think if she challenges him, says things like, are you good enough for this, or can you live up to this? You have to prove that you're that kind of thing. She has a chance to manipulate him, I think.
Yeah. Whether she figures it out,
she has to do it right, and I think
Marjorie figured out how to manipulate Joffrey, but Marjorie's better than Sansa.
She's older and she has the age advantage, whereas Ramsay is the tables are turned as far as the age in this case. Ramsay is the much older one in this case, but he's never really come across anything like Sansa. He, like he said, he was. Most of his life, he was expecting to marry some commoner because he was a bastard himself, and now his thing has changed. He's like, that's what he even tells her that. He's like, I meant that, and I believe him. I believe he meant it at the time when he told Miranda that he would marry her. He wasn't expecting to ever be a Bolton, and I believe that too. But he is a Bolton now, and he has to maintain this dynasty, as he said. And I'm not saying I prove all this, but I do think it's logically consistent from Ramsay's point of view. And so it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out. How much is Sansa going to be able to use her wiles and her nobility against him, and whether that will work, or whether he'll just be like, look, I'm a brute, and I'm going to do what I want. I'm going to go full psychopath, or whether she's able to, because he can be manipulated. We've seen how his father can, really bring him down, and how.
But his father seems to be pretty much the only one.
So far.
Well,
it remains to be seen if someone else can do that. And Sansa is, if anyone can do it, Sansa's got the opportunity. Ramsay's already pointed out that he's like, yeah, of course she's pretty. I have eyes, So that proves that at least shows that she's got something on him. And we've already seen that she's capable, or at least developing the capability to talk and to be, to use her abilities as a thinker and as a political player to do some things. And I'm really looking forward to seeing her continue along that path and seeing how she is able to do these things with Ramsay. And I hope she comes out on top. So let's talk a little bit about Roose and Ramsay and their scene. Ramsay, of course, is still petulant at the beginning of the scene. He's basically making fat jokes. How did you impregnate her? Can you tell that she's pregnant? And then Roose just basically cuts him down and says, you embarrassed yourself in there. And, oh, you're worried about your position. It's clear that I'm your son until a better alternative comes along. And so Roose gives the story of Ramsay's mother. What did you think about that? About the story of his...
It was awful. I mean,
it's pretty awful. Yeah.
In fact, that's something I wanted to talk about a little bit was I think there's two different sets of three characters in the show that have a lot of similarities, but also I guess one set has some more important distinctions. Viserys, Ramsay, and Joffrey. I think all three of them are sort of like sadistic, corrupt, spoiled, dark, evil, mean, self-centered, and they've all kind of like had their moments on the show. It's someone for us to love to hate. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They play a role in the series, and characters like that don't last long. They get themselves killed. But the show has a good job of like replacing them, if you will. Stannis, Tywin, and Roose, I think, have similarities, but important distinctions. All three of them are very cold, calculating patriarchs.
Yes.
And
fairly ruthless.
Ruthless, yes. But there are some distinctions. And I think they also have their own sort of... Tywin's missing a sense of humor, or at least a presentation of such. Because in the same way that Stannis gets his little wry remarks in, I think Roose gets them too. I love the line when Roose said, "I'm sure you're familiar with the procedure." That was so good.
That was really good.
But I think that Roose seems to be somewhat ambitious, as Tywin seems clearly very ambitious. I don't think Stannis is particularly ambitious. I think at this point where he's supposed to be the king, he's going to be the king. But he wasn't like gunning to be the king before. He's doing what is supposed to be done. Oh, I'm supposed to be king now. I'll be king now.
He's more proud than ambitious.
I'm supposed to defend his castle. I'll defend his castle. He's doing whatever is supposed to be done. I don't think he's actively ambitious like the other two are. Yeah. And he's not corrupt. I think that on some level or another, Tywin and Roose are corrupt. But although corrupt isn't quite the right word I want to use, but I'm going to say corrupt with power. They just don't have a sense of morality. Or whatever they have, it's to the extent that it's going to maneuver them through the world, not so much as what they think morality should be for the world. Does that make sense? Yes. They have a different morality than everyone else because of their power. Whereas I feel like Stannis follows the same morality that everyone else has, despite his power. I don't know. These are new thoughts kind of swirling in my mind because I think the characters are so similar, but I do think they have important distinctions, and I've been kind of like thinking about that recently, especially this episode because we get a lot of Stannis and Roose and kind of heading toward each other.
I had an interesting possible alternate interpretation of what happened in this Ramsay and Roose scene. Roose kind of assuages Ramsay's fears about being set aside. He says, no, look, you're my son, blah, blah, blah. But I think he may have had an ulterior motive. He may be telling the truth, but he immediately following that asks, are you going to help me fight Stannis? And he's like, yes, I'm going to help you fight Stannis. If he had said something like, oh, no, you might be set aside for this new son.
Are you going to help me fight Stannis? Whatever, Dad.
Well, you have to promise that I'm your first son,
Yeah.
So, the cynic in me, especially considering who is speaking, which Roose Bolton, you never can be too sure. He may have just been, trying to set his son up a little bit.
Telling Ramsay what he wants to hear.
Yeah, telling Ramsay what he wants to hear and keeping his mind. I don't know. I'm not saying that Roose is absolutely planning on setting Ramsay aside, but he's open to the idea.
Yeah. The more I think about it, I think you're right.
So and then we have the ending of that scene kind of it's a kind of a villain's moment where they're kind of the kind of camera cuts out and is like, the North is ours. Will you help me fight for it? And it's like the candles and the way they angle the camera really looked like a couple of supervillains like scheming over something with the music too. Not that it was cheesy, but it really just felt that kind of moment. And I kind of appreciated that, even though it was maybe a little too far with the villain aspect. Because when you paint characters as villains, it takes a little bit away from the grayness, even though they clearly are very villainous. But it makes you think that it makes me think that they're less of a factor than they would be if everyone's just playing in the game, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a bit of, I like the scene, but that's a mild criticism there. So, do you have any more thoughts on Roose and Ramsey?
Oh, that's about it, I think, for this
Okay,
episode.
so let's we're gonna do our credits, and I wanted to remind people that after these credits, we're gonna talk about the trailer, about the scenes on the next on. We're gonna talk about that for a few minutes because we have time. We often don't have time at the end of these episodes because we need to keep them at under 2 hours. So, real quick, folks, I want to thank our Patreon supporters, Hand of the King, Lord Cash Craig, a.k.a. Vaxis, on the History of Westeros forums. Our Warden of the North is Lord Parker, the Bastard of Starkville. We do not have a Warden of the South, East, or West. Our Master of Coin is Lord Robert Jacobs. Our Master of Whispers is Lord James the Scholar. Grand Maester Itai wears the jeweled collar of many metals. Rosie the Clever is our Master of Laws, and Lord James Tuttle is our Master of Ships. The History of Westeros Night's Watch Lord Commander is George the Golden. The History of Westeros Kingsguard is commanded by Lord Commander Shepard. Sir Troy the Steady swings the Valyrian steel blade Fate as the History of Westeros King's Justice. Lady Direliz of Castle Naki and Lord Nathan of the Fire Fort provide valuable lordly support and advice to the realm. If you're like me, you really enjoy audiobooks. If you are a show-only watcher and have been considering getting into the series, but find the thought of reading and setting aside that much time for what are clearly very large books intimidating, well, I have a suggestion. Try audiobooks. If you haven't already tried audiobooks, this is a great time to start. Check out A Game of Thrones on audio. That might be the best way for you to intake that, to read it, so to speak, without having to commit as much time, because you can listen while you're commuting. You can listen while you're going to work. You can maybe even listen while you're at work. You can listen while you're getting your exercise or doing housework. It really works out really well. This is what I do. This is one of the things that has gotten me to increase my level of knowledge about the series is by listening to the books frequently. So go to historyofwesteros.com. On the right side, you'll see a link to do a 30-day free trial on audible.com. That will come with one free download. Download A Game of Thrones. Try it out. If you don't like it, cancel the subscription. You've spent $0 and you've gotten a free copy of Game of Thrones on Audible. So win-win. You support the show. You might be a big windfall for you. You might discover that you love listening to the books, and that'll set you up for just days, literally days and days and days of entertainment. So I strongly suggest at least trying that out. Now, again, keep sending us questions and suggestions. Really enjoying the feel of all the interaction. So keep those coming. So if you are not interested in hearing the trailer discussion, this is where we sign off. So Valar Morghulis to you folks. But if you want to hear us talk about what's coming up, stay tuned. Next on, we have Arya, almost certainly in the next episode. We have a lot of scenes of Arya. We have a line of, is a girl ready to give up her identity? She's going farther down this path of having to become no one. And she's kind of walking towards some door, like it's ominous, like there's something behind it. Do you have any thoughts on what's coming up for Arya?
I'm not sure, although I do expect to see Arya in the next episode. There's a lot of stuff we didn't see in this past episode.
Yeah, I was really kind of expecting her to be. This will only be her third appearance out of, in 6 episodes. She'll only appeared in half of them.
I kind of waffle on watching the previews for the next week because sometimes I don't want to be tainted by what they're telling me is going to happen as I think about it. And this time I watched it. Sometimes I'm like, pause, rewind, pause. Hey, Aziz, what's this? Pause. Sometimes I don't watch it at all. This time I watched it one time, so it's not all clear in my mind. I just do remember there were images of King's Landing and of Arya. And what I sort of expect is sort of a slow roll for Arya. The thing that might be different there is which I would be a little excited about, but I don't really expect it. I sort of expect us to see Arya slowly become a faceless man and eventually reach this decision of whether or not she's really going to do it or not. And she'll have to make a decision about Needle. You know what I mean? But I don't know. I don't think it's going to be next episode. It's going to be like second to last or last episode.
Okay.
But the thing that might go different than what I expect that I would be kind of hopeful for is if Mace and Trant show up there. And if that is part of her decision, if she has the opportunity to kill Mare and Trant. That's the thing that I think.
If she has lost her identity, she shouldn't be going after him.
I don't even care, right? But if she's still in the process of losing her identity and shows up, it might be a dilemma for her. I don't think that'll happen next episode, but that's something I think would be neat to see.
Yeah. We also have... I agree with that take. That's really good. We also have scenes from Dorne. We don't see Jaime or Bronn, but we do see the Sand Snakes kind of on the move with Valyria. We hear some voiceovers about a Lannister and a Martell, and we see Myrcella getting a flower from Trystane, which shows that they're having some sort of legitimate romance, perhaps, or at least that is strongly suggested. It is not confirmed, and so we can expect to see more of that. It's really hard to see where that plot line is going. It's so early in that, so I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but
I honestly don't mind less plot line and more character development as far as that goes. I think Doran, am I saying it right?
Doran, yeah.
Is an intriguing character that we know almost nothing about, and I want to learn more about him, and I'm sure there'll be some plot development attached to it, but I'm happy to hear him tell a story about his father or his relationship with his brother or giving counsel to his son or something like that. I don't know if they'll go so far as to start developing Trystane and Myrcella as characters too. I'm not sure. It might add extra intrigue if Jaime shows up to save Myrcella, and she's like, I don't want to go, I'm in love, like...
it does seem that might be headed exactly that way. If Myrcella falls for Trystane, and it's sort of hinted at that's looking like it might happen.
Yeah.
For all we know, Myrcella is gonna be like, this dude is gross. She's just playing along like Sansa. What choice do I have? But we also are going to return to King's Landing. We will not have 2 in a row episodes without King's Landing, considering how rare it is to not have King's Landing at all. Well, we're going to see Olenna. That's cool. The Queen of Thorns looks to be returning. We see a shot of her. She doesn't look happy, nor would we expect her to be, considering what's happening to her grandson. Speaking of her grandson, we also see him being wrestled to the ground in front of Tommen, with the High Sparrow standing behind as if he's sort of overseeing stuff, like he's overpowering Tommen even. Tommen seems to be kind of powerless in this brief glimpse. And we also see Littlefinger stopped by Lancel in the streets or something. But we also see Littlefinger speaking with Cersei and how she's questioning him about the loyalty of the Vale and about his loyalty. And my prediction that he might be getting offered a high position like Hand of the King might be coming true there. I feel a little stronger about that. So what do you think, first backing up a little bit, what do you think about the situation with Loras and Olenna and Marjorie? They clearly have returned. Marjorie's also in the trailer.
Yeah, I'm sort of supposing Loras will be put on some sort of trial, probably for show. There's no way he could win, Maybe it'll be some kind of bargain. Maybe he can win by some sort of bargaining tool. I don't know if... He's not a Kingsguard, right? That was like a threat that Cersei had, but...
Tywin threatened Olenna to make him a Kingsguard, yeah.
Tywin, not Cersei, yeah, that's right. I don't know. There's a lot to speculate, and I'm mostly excited to see Olenna's character, because she always has the greatest interactions.
Yeah, she's always got great dialogue, so we're looking forward to that. Now, with Cersei and Littlefinger, that's really interesting. She's pressing him to declare his loyalty and declare the loyalty of the Vale as things really come to a head. She's looking to make sure she's looking for new allies and looking to make sure she keeps her old allies. And one suggestion that from a listener, watching her, to use my own term here, Acre Frey suggests that maybe Cersei is bringing Littlefinger to town simply to throw him to the High Sparrow as like an offering. Say, look, this is the guy running all these brothels. Like, I'm handing him over to you. Look how good look how good devout I am. Look how good I am as a ruler. I'm doing the things the faith wants. That is sort of at odds with her wanting to have the Vale on her side. That certainly, I don't think those two things work together so well. But I can imagine
that being a thing that Cersei didn't think it all out. You know what I mean? And or maybe it even could be the type of thing where Littlefinger doesn't want to be Hand of the King because I've got my own thing going on. She's like, look, you're gonna be Hand of the King, or we're gonna turn over the High Sparrow. Or maybe she wants him to go back to be Master of Coin, not be Hand of the King. Yeah. And Littlefinger's like, "What? I'm not gonna be." Oh, yes, you are. You know.
Yeah, he's gonna have a hard time refusing.
Yeah.
He does not have an army. He doesn't even have personal guards or anything like that. So I also wonder, yeah, like with Lancel accosting him in the street like that, I wonder what kind of danger he could be in. That scene may come after his stuff with Cersei and
Right. Yeah. The
fate-
order of the clips we saw. Is
Yeah,
hard to know.
that could be a little tricky editing there. They may be trying to show us, excuse me, one thing and make us think another. So the last thing we are seeing, or we are shown rather, is Bolton's in the snow. That might be a prelude to them marching off to go to war with Stannis. Now, one thing about that is if they go marching off to go fight Stannis, they're not going to leave the wedding for later.
They'll get that out of the way.
They'll get that done first. They're not going to leave.
So it might be a quick ceremony.
Yeah, it might be a quick ceremony. So we talked about the possibility of Sansa maybe trying to find a way to delay a wedding. That seems a little less likely now with the Boltons set to go marching relatively soon, apparently. So she may try to delay, but she may not be able to.
She seemed to expect it to happen fast. Remember, she told Littlefinger,
yeah,
next time you see me, I guess I'll be a married woman.
Yeah, I wonder if that'd be funny if that turned out to be her marrying someone else somehow. I don't know who, but
yeah, maybe that is also some sort of foreshadowing, some sort of misleading moment, some irony that she doesn't end up getting married. Or
maybe she'll never see Littlefinger again.
Yeah, I was gonna say Ned was gonna tell Jon who his mom was the next time he saw him again. So
that's a good point. So, all right, folks, that is our show for today. Thank you for tuning in. Thanks again to you, Sean, for joining us. And of course, folks, look out for our book to show review, which will be out within 24 to 48 hours of this one, where we will make lots of comparisons to the books and try to figure out what's happening based on the book plots and try to find out where they will combine plots and things like that. We always have a lot of fun with those, just as we always have a lot of fun with these show-only reviews. There's always so much to talk about. Game of Thrones is one of the most discussable things I've ever encountered in my entire life, and I'm so glad to be sharing it with you guys out there listening and watching. Again, keep the feedback and questions coming. It's making the show better. It's a community effort. We're all making the show, our experience, an improved thing and having a good time along the way. So thanks again to everybody, and we will see you next time. Valar Morghulis.